There's something unsettling about the sins we can't see. When most people think of sin, they imagine something obvious, something loud, a theft, a lie, a betrayal. They picture the major red lines that every soul, regardless of how religious or irreligious, seems to instinctively recognize as wrong. And so we comfort ourselves with the belief that as long as we avoid those major crimes, we're spiritually safe, protected, perhaps even righteous. But Islam teaches something far more subtle, far more piercing. The weight of sin is not measured only by what's visible to others or even to ourselves. Some of the most dangerous sins are not the ones committed with hands or tongues, but the ones we commit silently, buried in our daily habits, in our glances, in our thoughts, in the things we don't say, and in the worship we do for the wrong reasons. These are the sins that slip through the cracks of awareness, the ones we forget to repent for, not out of rebellion, but out of ignorance. And ignorance doesn't erase the burden. It only keeps us carrying it longer. There is a kind of heartbreak in realizing that you may have lived years of your life with unrecognized spiritual stains, not because you were evil, but because you never stopped to notice. And what makes this even more delicate is that these hidden sins are often dressed in normalcy. They are woven into the fabric of culture, passed off as harmless jokes, modern habits, or personal freedoms. And yet, every one of them has the power to dim the light of our hearts, to draw us subtly away from the mercy of Allah without us ever feeling the shift. Islam does not only ask us to avoid sin, it asks us to be aware, deeply, courageously aware, to interrogate our intentions, to pay attention to what others can't see, our inner dialogue, our private cliques, our idle moments. The Prophet Muhammad warned us not only about the visible haram, but also about the gray areas, those murky, doubtful matters that many fall into without realizing the spiritual consequences. He said there would come a time when holding on to the truth would feel like holding on to burning coal. Perhaps that time is now. In this modern world, sin has become easy, accessible, clickable, shareable, and most dangerously of all, forgettable. We forget that certain words, gestures, or decisions can carry a weight in the sight of Allah, even if they earn applause in the sight of people. We're trained to seek validation from others, to appear good, to sound good. But Allah sees deeper. He sees the intention behind every harmless comment. He hears the sighs we release in frustration at our parents. He watches when we delay our prayers not out of hardship, but out of heedlessness. And still, in His mercy, He gives us signs. He gives us guilt. He gives us the quiet, unsettling pull in our chest that says, "This isn't right." That is not punishment. That is love. A love that wants to pull us back before we drift too far. A love that whispers, "Awaken," before it's too late. This video is not about judgment. It is not a list to make you feel ashamed or broken. It is a reminder, gentle but urgent, that there are layers to sin, and some of them are hidden beneath smiles and good intentions. It is a call to wake up and examine the unseen burdens we carry, to bring light into the places we've ignored, to ask ourselves the uncomfortable questions, not to condemn ourselves but to cleanse, not to fear Allah as a tyrant, but to return to Him as the most merciful, the most loving, the one who wants better for us than we sometimes want for ourselves. So take a deep breath, open your heart. Let's walk together through 10 of the most overlooked sins in Islam. Not because we want to tally your mistakes, but because we want to unburden your soul. You may discover that repentance isn't always about the big things. Sometimes it's the small things, the ones hiding in plain sight, that most need your attention. And the moment you see them, everything begins to change. Sin number 1. Minor backbiting. Ghibah in disguise. It doesn't always sound harsh. Sometimes it comes wrapped in laughter. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, followed by the phrase, "Don't take this the wrong way." but. Or maybe it hides behind concern shaped as, I'm only telling you this because I care. What often goes unnoticed is that the tongue, even when soft, can be sharp enough to wound someone who isn't even present. And when that wound is made in their absence, it carries a name in Islam that is deeply serious. Ghibah, backbiting. We're taught from childhood that gossip is wrong, that speaking ill of others is discouraged. But as we grow older, the definition of backbiting becomes murky. Most people only associate it with direct insults or blatant mockery. Yet in truth, it takes many forms, some of them so subtle they slip past our defenses entirely. The Prophet Muhammad once asked his companions, "Do you know what backbiting is?" They replied, "Allah and His Messenger know best." He said, "It is to mention about your brother something he would dislike." One of the companions then asked, "What if what I say about him is true?" The Prophet replied, "If what you say about him is true, then you have backbitten him. And if it is not true, then you have slandered him." That statement is enough to pause the heart. Truth does not excuse ghibah. In fact, it is what makes it backbiting in the first place. And this is where many fall into sin without realizing it. They assume that speaking about someone's faults is harmless as long as they're not lying. But Allah, in His infinite wisdom, equated this act to something far more graphic. In Surah Al-Hujurat, He asks, "Would one of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? You would detest it." It is not a metaphor chosen by accident. Backbiting is a spiritual cannibalism, consuming a person's honor when they aren't there to defend themselves. The irony is that ghibah often disguises itself as righteousness. It hides in religious circles, disguised as concern. One person might say, "I'm only mentioning this so we can make dua for her," while relaying deeply private information about someone else's sin. Another might justify it by saying, "He needs to be warned," when in reality, they're spreading half-truths tinged with personal resentment. What begins as a conversation turns into an autopsy of someone's character, dissected word by word, behind closed doors. And in the age of digital communication, the disguise becomes even more powerful. A passing message in a group chat, a private comment under a post, a reaction emoji that carries more meaning than words. All of these can hold the weight of backbiting. You don't have to speak loudly. You don't even have to speak at all. Sometimes ghibah is in the silence that follows a knowing glance, or the smirk that says, "You know what I mean." It is in the suggestive tone, the strategic pause, the selective sharing of a detail meant to plant a seed of judgment. The danger lies not just in what is said, but in the intention behind it. Ghibah is not a slip of the tongue. It is a window into the state of the heart. When we feel the need to bring someone else down in their absence, it reflects an emptiness in ourselves. It speaks to our own insecurities, our jealousy, our pride. Sometimes it comes from a desire to belong, to connect with others through shared disdain. Other times it stems from a place of unresolved anger, where talking about someone becomes an outlet for our bitterness. But no matter the reason, the harm remains the same, and so does the sin. What's even more painful is that the one who is being backbitten has no idea. They're not there to defend themselves, not there to correct the misunderstanding, not there to protect their reputation. Meanwhile, their dignity is being quietly dismantled. And in the sight of Allah, that harm is not forgotten. It is recorded. The scales will not ignore it. In fact, some scholars say that on the day of judgment, those who have backbitten others will have to give away their good deeds to those they wronged, even if the victim never knew a word was said against them. But there is a mercy in all of this, and that mercy lies in awareness. The moment we realize that ghibah is more than just open insults, that it can be veiled, accidental, or even socially accepted, is the moment we begin to guard our tongues more closely. Allah is not waiting to punish us. He is waiting for us to wake up, to reflect, to return. Every time we bite our tongue instead of speaking ill, every time we choose silence over slander, we are protecting not just the honor of others, but the purity of our own soul. So the next time a conversation begins to drift towards someone else's flaws, even if it's just lighthearted, remember this. If you wouldn't say it in front of them, don't say it behind them. And if you have, seek forgiveness, not just from Allah, but from the person you wronged, if possible. Because on that day when all secrets are laid bare, it will not be your tone that's judged. It will be your truth. And sometimes, the smallest sentence carries the heaviest sin. Sin number 2, delaying salah without valid reason. There is a sacred rhythm to the day of a believer, and it begins with the sound of the adhan. 5 moments spread across morning, noon, afternoon, evening, and night are not just appointments. They are divine invitations, an open door to speak with the one who created time itself. Salah is not simply a ritual or a checkbox on a list of religious duties. It is a mercy, a reset, a moment where the soul is reminded of its purpose. Yet despite this gift, many hearts grow careless. The danger lies not in outright abandonment of prayer, but in the casual delays, the silent, habitual pushing of salah to the edge of its prescribed time, for no reason other than distraction, laziness, or convenience. It usually starts subtly. A person hears the adhan, feels the pull in their chest, but tells themselves, "I'll pray in a bit." That bit turns into minutes. The minutes stretch into an hour, and before long, the sun begins to set on a prayer that should have been performed long ago. There was no emergency, no pressing hardship, no genuine excuse, just a slow erosion of urgency. And as this pattern repeats, the soul becomes desensitized. What once stirred guilt now feels normal. The heart, once soft and responsive to the call of Allah, begins to harden with indifference. This is not just a missed opportunity, it is a sin. In the eyes of many, delaying the prayer might not seem like a serious offense. After all, the prayer is still performed, the words are still recited, the body still moves in submission. But what is missed is the spirit of the act, the obedience and timing, the discipline of surrendering our plans to God's command. Salah has a window, a divine schedule, and within that window lies blessing. Delaying it without valid reason shows a subtle yet dangerous prioritization of worldly matters over the Creator. It is as though one silently tells Allah, "What I'm doing now matters more than you." This mindset, whether acknowledged or not, is what pulls the believer away from Allah, one prayer at a time. Allah, in His mercy, made the timings of Salah clear and fixed. The Prophet Muhammad described them with precision, showing the companions when to pray by the movement of the sun across the sky. And in that simplicity lies a profound truth. We are not the masters of time. We do not own the hours. We are guests passing through a world that was created for worship. And every delay without cause is a moment stolen from the soul's nourishment. The Prophet once said that the most beloved action to Allah is the prayer at its proper time. That statement alone should stir the heart, to know that just being punctual with our prayer could make us beloved to the Almighty. What greater motivation could there be? And yet the modern world moves fast. We are conditioned to chase deadlines, meetings, messages, entertainment. Salah begins to feel like an interruption rather than a blessing. The phone lights up, the tasks pile on, and the whisper comes, "Just finish this first." But that first never ends. One distraction leads to another, and by the time we return to Allah, we are breathless, rushing, barely aware. The connection is made in body, but the soul is absent. And sometimes, the prayer slips entirely past its time, leaving behind nothing but a lingering discomfort we push away. But Allah sees. He sees when we delay out of neglect. He knows when we had the time, but chose something else. And yet, He still waits, still accepts, still forgives, if only we turn back. Delaying salah without reason is not just a matter of losing reward. It reflects the state of our relationship with Allah. When we delay communication with someone we love, it shows. The same applies with our Creator. The question must be asked: if we're always too busy to meet Him on time, how much room have we truly made for Him in our lives? And what happens when death comes at an unannounced hour? What if the moment we delay our prayer is the last breath we're given? There are countless stories of lives ending suddenly, during sleep, on the road, in the middle of routine. None of us knows when our final salah will be. None of us can guarantee that we'll get another chance to say, Allahu Akbar. That thought alone should awaken a fear, but also a hope. Because the solution is so near, it takes only one decision, one shift in priority, to return to that sacred rhythm. To feel the tranquility of praying as soon as the call is made. To stand before Allah knowing you answered Him without delay. To reclaim the honor of salah not as a burden, but as a meeting with the most merciful. That is where transformation begins. Not in grand gestures, but in small moments of obedience. The next time you hear the adhan, pause. Let everything else wait. Let the world's demands fade into the background, even for a few minutes. Because in that moment, your Lord is calling, not for His benefit, but for yours. He is not in need of your prayer. You are in need of Him. And He has made Himself available at precise times to those who are willing to respond. The delay might seem harmless, but in the spiritual realm, every moment counts. Every hesitation is a test, and every choice, even the smallest one, writes a line in your eternal story. May Allah make us among those who never hesitate when He calls, and who find peace in being on time for Him. Sin number 3, not lowering the gaze. Men and women. There are sins that pierce the heart in silence. No one else hears them. No one else sees them. They leave no physical scar, no trail, no confession, but they echo in the soul, in the quiet after the glance. This is the sin of the unguarded gaze. A look left unchecked, a gaze that lingers too long, a moment of visual indulgence that the heart pretends is harmless. Yet in the eyes of the one who sees all, even a glance can become an act of betrayal. In the Quran, Allah speaks directly to both men and women. Lower your gaze. This command isn't presented as a suggestion or a lofty ideal. It's direct, immediate, urgent. Not because the gaze itself is inherently sinful. After all, to see is to exist. But because what follows the gaze is often more dangerous than we're willing to admit. The eyes are the doorway to the heart, and when that door is left open, desires creep in like a quiet storm, rearranging the furniture of the soul. It often begins unintentionally, a glance while walking down the street, a scroll through a feed, a click on a thumbnail. The world today has made it almost impossible to look away. Screens glow in our hands, filled with images that were once hard to find, but are now unavoidable. What used to require effort is now instant. What was once shameful is now normalized. The test of the eyes, especially in the digital age, is no longer rare. It is constant. And yet the real issue isn't exposure, it's response. The sin is not in seeing, but in choosing to keep looking when you could have looked away. That moment, that decision to prolong the glance, to let the image burn itself into memory, is where the heart begins to shift. It's subtle, like a crack in glass. At first, nothing seems broken, but over time the fracture spreads. The soul becomes restless, seeking more of what it knows it shouldn't have seen. and the eyes, which were once a vessel for light, become a channel for temptation. For many, the struggle feels invisible. It doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't involve another person. It's private, internal, a battle fought behind eyelashes. But it matters, because what the eyes consume, the heart remembers. And what the heart remembers, the body follows. That's why the Prophet Muhammad described the eyes as capable of committing zina, not in the physical sense, but in intention. A look can carry a desire, a look can ignite a fire, and if left unchecked, that fire consumes clarity, purity, even faith. What's more dangerous is how this sin often escapes our guilt. Because it's so quick, so common, so easily dismissed, many don't even consider it a sin at all. I'm not doing anything, one might say. I'm just looking. But Allah knows the difference between a glance that lands and one that lingers, between an accidental look and a deliberate return, between a pure heart and one that is slowly, silently intoxicated. In a world where appearances are idolized and modesty is mocked, guarding the gaze becomes an act of resistance. Not because the world expects it, but because Allah does. Lowering the gaze is not repression, it's protection. Protection for the heart, which cannot serve two masters. Protection for the soul, which craves peace, but feeds on what it sees. Protection for the mind, which stores images like seeds and unknowingly waters them in solitude. And yet protection is difficult because the eyes are hungry. They wander, they search, they crave. But there is something beautiful that happens when a believer in the middle of temptation chooses restraint. When the eyes fall, but the soul rises. That moment, brief as it may be, is honored by Allah. The angels record it. The heart feels it. And what once felt like sacrifice begins to feel like strength. Because there is serenity in obedience, a kind of peace that cannot be found in indulgence. The world says, look, enjoy, admire. But the heart whispers, no, not this time. And in that refusal, the soul is lifted. This is not about shame. It is about awareness, about understanding the cost of something that seems so small. A single glance may not seem like much, but repeated over time, it becomes a habit, and habits shape destiny. The eyes, if left unguarded, can lead us to places the heart never intended to go. They can build fantasies that separate us from reality. They can stir desires that were never meant to be awakened. And yet, through all of this, Allah remains patient, always waiting, always willing to forgive, always ready to purify what we are willing to correct. Lowering the gaze is not a denial of beauty. It is a declaration of discipline. It is not weakness. It is worship. To look away is to look toward Allah. To train the eyes is to soften the heart. And to do so, again and again, in a world that encourages the opposite, is among the greatest acts of devotion one can offer. So the next time your gaze is drawn towards something it shouldn't be, pause. Remind yourself that what you choose to look at is also a reflection of what you believe. The eyes may want it, but the soul knows better. And in that moment of choice, your worship is not just in your prayer, it is in your vision. Because the believer doesn't only guard their limbs, they guard their light, and the eyes are where that light begins. Sin number 4. Arrogance in the heart, even in thoughts. There are sins that shout, and there are sins that whisper. Some are visible in action, while others hide beneath the surface, cloaked in politeness, buried in gestures that seem pure. But perhaps the most dangerous sins are the ones that live in silence, taking root not in what we say or do, but in what we think. Among these, arrogance is one of the most insidious. Not the loud arrogance of the boastful or the cruel, but the quiet kind. The one that rests, undetected, in the chambers of the heart. The kind that smiles, that helps, that prays, all while believing, even slightly, I am better than them. This kind of arrogance doesn't announce itself. It rarely looks like pride. It looks like condescension dressed as concern. It feels like a warm sense of superiority when hearing of someone else's sins, or the subtle satisfaction in witnessing someone else's failure. It appears when a person thinks their way is always right, their worship always superior, their opinions always pure. And because this form of arrogance isn't loud, it's rarely confronted. But in the sight of Allah, it is poison. The Prophet Muhammad gave a warning that should shake the core of every believer. No one who has an atom's weight of arrogance in their heart will enter paradise. The companions, startled by the gravity of this statement, asked whether this meant that a person could not dress nicely or enjoy good things. But the Prophet clarified, arrogance is to reject the truth and to look down on others. That's where it lives, in the resistance to truth and the devaluation of fellow human beings. Not in what's worn, but in what's believed. And that belief doesn't always come from a place of aggression. Sometimes it's born from sincerity that is left unchecked. A person who prays consistently may begin to feel quietly superior to one who struggles to wake up for Fajr. A woman who wears hijab may look at those who don't and think, at least I'm not like them. A brother who memorizes Quran may silently judge those who haven't, assuming they lack dedication. None of these thoughts are spoken. They remain hidden. But they're recorded, they're witnessed, and they reflect something very different from righteousness. They reflect ego. What's frightening is how close arrogance can sit beside acts of worship. It thrives in spaces of religious knowledge, grows quietly in circles of piety, disguises itself as discipline. And if a person isn't careful, their worship can become less about pleasing Allah and more about proving their worth to others, or worse, to themselves. They begin to measure the value of people by their own standards, forgetting that guidance is a gift, not an achievement, that no one attains faith by effort alone, that Allah can elevate the one who sins yet repents over the one who worships yet judges. This is not to discourage striving. Islam encourages excellence, but when excellence turns into arrogance, it loses its value. There is a difference between being grateful for guidance and assuming it makes us better than others. A grateful heart says, Alhamdulillah, Allah protected me. An arrogant heart says, I would never do what they did. And the latter is dangerous, not just because of the sin of pride, but because of how Allah may respond. Stories of reversal are many. There are those who lived lives of outward piety, only to fall into deep error. And there are those who stumbled in sin for years, only to rise with sincere repentance and become beloved to Allah. The one who was judged ends up ahead, and the one who judged is left behind. Not because Allah is unjust, but because He sees what we don't. He sees hearts. He sees the intention behind every act. He sees the pride hidden inside quiet glances, and He purifies whom He wills. It is arrogance that caused Iblis to fall. He didn't deny Allah. He didn't reject the command out of ignorance. He simply couldn't accept that someone else, fashioned from clay, could be honored above him. That was the seed. I am better than him, he said. And that sentence marked the beginning of his eternal ruin. How many believers echo this same thought without ever saying it aloud? Not with the same boldness, but with the same pride. How many feel deep down that their status in the sight of God is higher than others? Because of lineage, or race, or knowledge, or clothing, or discipline. The cure begins with remembrance. To remember that we came from a drop of fluid, that we were once helpless, that every blessing we carry, our speech, our limbs, our faith, can be taken in an instant. The moment that thought arises, that we are somehow superior, we must return to the mirror of truth. Not the mirror that reflects our faces, but the one that reflects our hearts. Because the heart can deceive, and only through constant self-accounting can it be tamed. Every soul has moments of arrogance. It's human. But what separates the humble from the proud is what they do with that moment. Do they indulge in it, or do they fight it? Do they believe the illusion, or do they seek refuge in Allah? In the end, it's not the presence of arrogance that damns a person. It's their refusal to recognize it, to battle it, to repent for it. Because the real danger is not in being flawed. The real danger is in being proud of it. And the one who believes they are safe is the one most at risk. Sin number 5. Listening to haram without guilt. The ears are a gift often forgotten. They sit quietly, never demanding attention, never pausing for rest. Even while we sleep, they are awake. They receive everything: the laughter, the pain, the cries for help, the verses of the Quran, the whispers of temptation. And what we feed them becomes part of us. What we choose to let in shapes how we think, how we feel, and ultimately, who we are. Yet in a world overflowing with sound, the sin of listening to what displeases Allah often goes unnoticed, or worse, becomes normalized. It is easy to imagine that sin belongs only to what is said, that as long as we don't speak haram, we are safe. But in truth, listening with intention is a form of participation. The heart is not disconnected from the ears. What we hear does not pass through us like the wind. It leaves marks, often deep ones, whether we realize it or not. And when we listen to what is forbidden, not by accident but with desire, interest, and enjoyment, we take part in the act itself. Some say, it's just music, or it's only a podcast, or it's just entertainment. But this is where the deception begins, because what's presented as harmless can sometimes be the most harmful. When lyrics glorify sin, celebrating adultery, intoxication, pride, rebellion, disrespect, and we absorb them with joy, we begin to carry those values within us. We may not repeat the words, but our hearts beat in rhythm with them. We may not act them out, but our minds begin to lose sensitivity toward what they represent. What's dangerous is not just the content, it's the loss of guilt. There was a time, perhaps, when hearing such things made us uncomfortable, when certain words stung, when a line in a song or a vulgar joke on a show made us shift in our seat. That discomfort was a gift. It was the soul recognizing a violation. It was Allah placing a warning sign within us. But when we continue listening, when we treat it as normal, when we silence the voice inside that says, "This is not for me," the heart begins to change. What once made us uneasy now becomes familiar. What once felt wrong now feels necessary. And slowly, the barrier between the believer and sin wears thin. Islam calls us to a higher level of consciousness, not only in action, but in attention. The Prophet Muhammad said that in the body, there is a piece of flesh. If it is sound, the whole body is sound. And if it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. That piece is the heart. And the heart is directly affected by what the ears receive, the stories we listen to, the voices we allow into our inner world, the rhythms we attach to our emotions. These things are not light. They are not entertainment alone. They are spiritual influences, and without realizing it, they begin to write the script of our lives. Sometimes the greatest harm comes not from the most obscene content, but from the most subtle. a seemingly innocent song that wraps desire in poetry, a charming voice that ridicules faith with cleverness, a comedian who makes sin seem like a joke worth laughing at. These moments build up, and with each exposure, the soul adapts. The believer who once guarded their ears now finds it harder to distinguish what's harmful. They don't just listen, they enjoy. They don't just enjoy, they crave. And in that craving, guilt disappears. But Allah sees. He knows the moments we tell ourselves, just one more episode, or this doesn't affect me. He knows when we sit in gatherings where others backbite and we stay silent, not because we approve, but because we don't want to be uncomfortable. Yet our silence becomes consent. Our ears are not neutral, they are witnesses. On the day of judgment, they will testify. They will speak about what they were exposed to, what they were forced to hear, and what they were drawn to willingly. The body that seemed silent will suddenly find its voice, and every moment of listening, whether sacred or sinful, will be recounted. But there is hope. There is always hope. The heart can still be softened. The ears can be redirected. The soul can find purity again. It begins with honesty, with acknowledging what we've let in, with feeling that sting of guilt, not to drown in shame, but to swim back to Allah. He is the one who knows our struggle. He is the one who rewards even the smallest effort to protect our senses. When we turn off what displeases Him, even if it hurts, even if it feels like we're giving up something we enjoy, He replaces it with something better, something lasting, something healing. Because in the end, what we choose to listen to is not just about sound, it's about who we're becoming. Are we letting our ears lead us toward light or darkness, toward remembrance or heedlessness, toward peace or agitation? Every audio we absorb writes a line in our soul. Every choice to guard our hearing builds our shield. Every moment of silence we choose over sin brings us closer to the one whose words are the sweetest of all. And when we fill our ears with what is pure, we begin to hear the world differently. We begin to hear our own heart again. We begin to hear the whispers of guidance that once were drowned out by noise. Because sometimes the loudest sin is the one we listen to quietly. Sin number 6, wasting time and not repenting for it. There is something uniquely deceptive about time. It moves quietly, slipping through our hands without sound, without weight. It doesn't ask permission to pass, nor does it leave a trail. And because it disappears so silently, we forget its value, until it's too late. We forget that time is not just something we spend. It's something we will be held accountable for. Every second, every breath, every idle moment. In the eyes of the world, wasting time may seem harmless. In the eyes of Allah, it can become one of the most dangerous forms of heedlessness. The Quran opens some of its most powerful chapters with oaths, and among the most striking is the oath by time itself. By time, indeed, mankind is in loss. It's not just poetic, it's a warning, a divine truth that every passing hour is either pulling us closer to Jannah or further into regret. And yet, most people live as if time is infinite, as if tomorrow is guaranteed, as if their lives are a canvas with endless space. But the ink runs out. The clock strikes. And many will wake up on the day of judgment with nothing to show for a life filled with distractions. Wasting time isn't always dramatic. It doesn't always look like sin. It can hide behind good intentions, behind comfort, behind the glow of a screen. A person may not lie, steal, or harm, but they may spend their days in constant delay. Delay of purpose, delay of worship, delay of becoming who they were created to be. They tell themselves they'll change later, pray later, learn later, apologize later. But later is not a promise. Later is a veil that shrouds the truth, that now is all we ever really have. And when now is neglected, the soul suffers. What makes wasting time so tragic is not just the lost potential, but the fact that so few recognize it as sin. It feels passive, it feels empty. But in Islam, emptiness without intention is not neutral. It is a form of spiritual erosion. The heart wasn't created to drift, it was created to seek. And when it stops seeking, it begins to fill itself with distractions that numb rather than nourish. A mind that could be pondering Allah instead repeats empty slogans. A tongue that could be remembering Him instead echoes lyrics and nonsense. A body that could be bowing in prayer instead sinks into passivity. And all the while, time slips away, unaccounted for. Yet the deeper sin isn't only in the waste, it's in the lack of repentance. Because many people feel guilty over missed prayers, harsh words, or major mistakes. But how many weep over the hours they let vanish into nothingness? How many ask Allah to forgive them for the nights spent scrolling, the mornings spent sleeping, the opportunities to do good that were ignored simply because they didn't feel urgent? The Prophet Muhammad taught us that on the Day of Judgment, we will be questioned about our lives, how we spent them, where we directed our energy, what we did with our youth. And for many, the answer will be silence, not because they committed great evil, but because they committed nothing. They drifted, they waited, they drowned in triviality. And the saddest part is that time doesn't just disappear, it shapes who we become. Each wasted hour reinforces habits. Every moment of heedlessness pushes us further from awareness. What feels like just a break becomes a lifestyle. What begins as "I'm just tired" becomes an identity. Before long, a person finds themselves numb to the Quran, distant from prayer, forgetful of dhikr. Not because they turned away intentionally, but because they let the days pass without care. But even here, there is hope. Allah is the turner of hearts, and no matter how many moments we've wasted, He can still make the next one count. The soul can still awaken. The clock can still serve as a reminder, not a weapon. It starts with a single realization that our time is our greatest asset, greater than money, than power, than health, because time is the vessel through which we earn the hereafter. And once it's gone, no prayer, no charity, no act of kindness can be squeezed into the seconds we've already spent. To feel sorrow for wasted time is not weakness, it is faith. It is the soul recognizing that it was made for more than comfort. It was made for purpose. And that purpose doesn't require grand acts. It requires presence. A heart that remembers. A schedule shaped by intention. A life lived with the awareness that each breath is a gift. And one day, we will breathe our last. So if today you find yourself wondering where the time has gone, you're not alone. But you're not powerless either. Even now in this very moment, you can reclaim it. You can repent for the moments lost and dedicate the moments ahead. You can speak to Allah not with shame, but with sincerity. Ya Allah, forgive me for the time I wasted. Make the time I have left a path to you. Because what matters most is not how much time you've had. It's what you choose to do with what remains. Sin number 7, poor treatment of parents in small ways. There are few relationships in this life that hold the weight, the depth, and the sacredness of the one between a child and their parents. It is a bond rooted not just in biology, but in divine instruction. From the moment a soul enters this world, its first duty, even before prayer, before fasting, before any other act of worship, is respect and kindness toward the ones who nurtured it. And yet, it is often in this very relationship, the one most honored in Islam, that people fall into sin, not through major acts of abuse or abandonment, but through the quiet cracks of daily life, through sighs, through silence, through subtle expressions of annoyance that go unnoticed by others, but are never hidden from the one who sees all. When Allah speaks of obedience, When he commands us to worship him alone, he immediately follows it with a command that echoes with urgency. Be good to your parents. That proximity and instruction is not coincidental. It reflects a spiritual connection. That reverence for the Creator must be mirrored in the way we treat those who were chosen to raise us. And yet, for many, it's not the grand acts of disrespect that are the problem. It's the small ones, the casual tone, the dismissive answer, the moments of neglect disguised as being busy. The sin lies in the ordinary. A mother calls, and her child delays responding. A father speaks, and his words are met with an absent-minded, "yeah." These moments seem harmless. They don't leave bruises. They don't shout. But they chip away at the honor that parents are meant to be given. And each time that honor is compromised even slightly, the soul distances itself from mercy. Because honoring parents is not about obligation, it's about gratitude. It's about recognizing that you once existed entirely by their care, that they lost sleep for you, that their prayers, their pain, their patience were all part of the unseen scaffolding that allowed you to grow. And when that sacrifice is met with indifference even once, it matters. The Quran does not just command kindness. It forbids even the smallest expression of frustration. Not even an oof, Allah says. That word, so short, so soft, holds a mountain of meaning. It is the sound of impatience, the sound of irritation, the sound that escapes when we think no one will notice. And yet, Allah noticed, and He forbade it, because He knows that hearts are wounded not just by what is shouted, but by what is muttered. A parent does not need to hear cruel words to feel dishonored. A delayed response, a heavy sigh, a cold shoulder, these are enough. In a world that often glorifies independence, many forget the spiritual weight of this relationship. People chase careers, relationships, goals, and in the pursuit of those dreams, they forget the hands that once held them steady. They forget the faces that once smiled with pride when they spoke their first words. They forget that paradise itself lies beneath the feet of the mother, that a father's pleasure is a reflection of Allah's, that a single prayer from a parent whispered in the darkness of the night can change the course of a life. Yet how often are those prayers neglected? How often are parents made to feel like burdens, as if their needs, their stories, their presence is something to tolerate rather than cherish? How many parents sit quietly in their homes, waiting for a call that never comes, hoping for a visit that's always delayed? And how many children walk this earth believing themselves righteous, while their own parents feel forgotten? It is not always anger that wounds a parent. Sometimes it is absence. Sometimes it is the way a child looks through them instead of at them. The way their presence is treated like background noise instead of sacred company. Sometimes it is the way a phone is prioritized over their words, or the way their advice is brushed off with the arrogance of modern knowledge. And sometimes it is simply the silence, the long stretches of time in which they are not heard, not thanked, not remembered. But Allah remembers. He remembers every unspoken kindness and every unspoken slight. He rewards those who honor their parents not only in times of need, but in moments of comfort. And He sees the sins that others miss. The sin of a raised eyebrow, the sin of emotional distance, the sin of treating parents like relics of a past we've outgrown. What's terrifying is that these sins can become habitual. They can be woven into the fabric of our daily interactions. And because they're small, they're rarely repented for. But small sins, repeated often, become stains on the heart. They erode blessings. They block prayers. They dim the light that once came easily. A person may wonder why their life feels heavy, why peace escapes them, and never realize that it was a missed phone call, a sarcastic reply, a rolled eye that planted the seed. Yet the door to redemption is always open. A kind word, a sincere apology, a quiet dua made for them in the dead of night. These are the acts that restore what was broken, and Allah, in His mercy, honors those who return, not just to Him, but to the ones He gave us first. Because to serve parents is to serve the path of Jannah, and to neglect them, even in small ways, is to forget the vessel through which our very life was delivered. Sin number 8, mocking or belittling others. Jokingly. Sometimes sin doesn't wear a dark cloak. It doesn't announce itself with menace or cruelty. Sometimes it arrives in the middle of laughter, in a room filled with smiles among friends. During what feels like harmless fun, it hides in humor, in sarcasm, in the warmth of shared amusement. And because it makes people laugh, we rarely pause to consider who may be hurting in the silence that follows. Among the most overlooked sins in our modern world is the act of mocking or belittling others, especially when it's done in jest. The line between humor and humiliation is dangerously thin. One word, one joke, one exaggerated impression of someone's voice, manner, background, or body, and the atmosphere erupts with laughter. But that moment, that single punchline, could be heavy in the eyes of Allah. Because behind every joke, there's often a heart. And behind every heart is a story. And when that heart feels targeted, when dignity is chipped away, even slightly, the laughter becomes a form of oppression, not one that bruises the skin, but one that bruises the soul. The tragedy is that this sin often comes from those who don't intend harm. Friends tease each other, siblings mock, groups bond over shared jokes, and the one being laughed at may even smile. They may laugh along. But smiling doesn't always mean they're okay. Laughing doesn't always mean it didn't hurt. Some people choose silence over confrontation. Some swallow pain to preserve peace. But Allah knows what weighs on the heart. He knows when a joke goes too far. He knows when it's no longer fun, but humiliation masked as wit. The Quran speaks clearly about this. Allah warns believers not to let one group of people mock another because they may be better than them. This isn't just a guideline for manners. It's a commandment rooted in justice. Because the moment you mock someone, you elevate yourself by lowering them. You declare, intentionally or not, that their way of speaking, their choices, their appearance, their struggles are somehow worth less than yours. And that assumption is not just unkind, it is spiritually dangerous. What makes this sin so deceptive is that it's often rewarded by society. The funnier you are, the more admired you become. The better your timing, your wit, your ability to imitate or roast someone else, the more people gravitate toward you. Entire careers have been built on the ability to make others laugh at someone's expense. Audiences cheer, comments flood in. But in the unseen world, where angels record not applause but intention, what is being written? Mockery, even if accidental, can sever the invisible thread of dignity every human being is entitled to. It creates spaces where people no longer feel safe to be themselves. It shapes children who carry scars for years after being laughed at in classrooms. It creates adults who second-guess every word they say for fear of being the next target. And sometimes, the damage isn't obvious. It doesn't erupt into tears. It sits quietly, in the corners of someone's self-worth, whispering to them that maybe they really are odd, lesser, unworthy. And then there's the danger of habitual mockery, the type that becomes second nature. Some people carry it like a reflex. They can't hear someone's accent, see someone's behavior, or notice someone's clothing without making a joke of it. It becomes so embedded in their character that they forget how to see people without seeing flaws. They forget how to speak without comparing, how to entertain without hurting. And when this habit remains unchallenged, it reshapes their soul. It teaches the heart to find joy in someone else's discomfort. And that is a deeply corrosive form of pride. But it doesn't have to be that way. The beauty of Islam is that it not only tells us what is wrong, but it gives us a path back. If we've hurt someone through humor, even unintentionally, there is still time to repair. Apology, done sincerely, is powerful. Reflection is powerful. Looking back on our words, our jokes, our social media posts, and asking ourselves who we may have harmed, that's not weakness. That's strength. That's a heart choosing humility over ego. And if we've been the one mocked, the one belittled, we are not forgotten. Allah is closer to the brokenhearted than we can imagine. His justice is precise. His mercy is vast. He knows the tears held back behind laughter. He knows the long nights of overthinking. And for every insult endured with patience, there is a reward waiting that no joke can take away. We are all mirrors of each other. To mock one is to crack the mirror of humanity. And while humor is a gift, a balm, a way to bring joy, it was never meant to come at the cost of someone else's dignity. The Prophet Muhammad was known for his lightheartedness, but never for mockery. His smile was a source of comfort, not discomfort. His words lifted people. They didn't break them. In a world that applauds those who can tear others down with cleverness, be the one who speaks gently. In gatherings where others joke about someone's flaws, be the one who shifts the tone, not with anger, but with compassion. Because real humor doesn't need a victim, and real believers never find joy in another's humiliation, even if it ends with a laugh. Sin number 9, not fulfilling promises, including online commitments. There is something sacred about a promise, not because it's carved in stone or sealed in blood, but because it is spoken with trust. It is a bond formed not only between two people, but between intention and responsibility. When a believer says they will do something, that word becomes a reflection of their soul. And in Islam, breaking that promise, even if it seems small or insignificant, is not just a failure of etiquette. It is a sin and a sign that something deeper may be fractured within the heart. Promises today are often made without pause. A quick, "I'll be there," a casual, "I'll get back to you," or a cheerful, "Sure, count on me." These words are thrown into conversations, typed into chats, added to comments, as if they're weightless. But in the unseen world, every promise made is recorded. Every commitment, no matter how minor, is noted by the angels who write not just our deeds, but our intentions. What we forget or dismiss, they remember. The Prophet Muhammad, the most truthful of all creation, described a powerful reality. Among the signs of a hypocrite is that when he makes a promise, he breaks it. This warning isn't about perfection. It's about intention and effort. It's about taking our words seriously because the believer's word should be as dependable as prayer. A promise isn't just a task. It's a matter of character. And today, perhaps more than ever, promises are made lightly. The digital world has made commitment feel disposable. We agree to meetings, reply inshallah to invitations, subscribe to deadlines, and RSVP to events, all with the ease of a click. But when the time comes, we ghost. We disappear. We leave people waiting, wondering, disappointed. And rarely do we pause to reflect on the spiritual weight of that absence. In the silence after a broken promise, trust begins to wither. Relationships weaken, respect erodes. Sometimes, all a person needed was to be seen, to be heard, to be remembered. And our failure to show up becomes more than a schedule issue. It becomes a wound. And while others may forgive or forget, Allah does not overlook the way we treat the trust others place in us, especially when fulfilling a promise was fully within our control. This sin doesn't require bad intentions. Sometimes it grows out of forgetfulness, disorganization, or laziness. But even these must be examined. A believer must live with awareness, aware of time, of responsibilities, of the value of their own word. Because when we treat our promises as optional, we're not only hurting others, we're slowly training our hearts to accept dishonesty. And this applies not just to our personal relationships, but to our professional and online lives as well. In a world of freelancers, entrepreneurs, students, and digital creators, commitments are made constantly. Promises to send files, to finish edits, to respond to emails, to deliver work. It's easy to think they'll understand, or I'll do it later. But that delay, that disregard, can become sinful. Not because the task was delayed, but because the promise was broken. Even when the other person is patient, even when they don't complain. The same is true for social media, a realm where promises are made publicly, yet rarely fulfilled. New video dropping tomorrow. I'll go live at 8. I'll answer DMs soon. These statements are seen by thousands, sometimes millions, and yet they're treated more like suggestions than obligations. And while followers may scroll past and move on, Allah watches the heart that spoke. He knows whether that promise was made sincerely and whether it was neglected out of laziness, pride, or carelessness. The sin of breaking a promise is not in the difficulty of life disrupting our plans. It is in the ease with which we let people down without remorse. It is in the silence that follows, the lack of explanation, the assumption that no one noticed. But someone always notices, and when the one who trusted us feels let down, their prayer may reach the heavens before our apology ever does. And yet, the beauty of Islam is that it never leaves us without a path back. To feel guilt for a broken promise is a sign of faith. To seek forgiveness not only from Allah but from the one we disappointed is an act of humility. And to rebuild trust with consistency and care is one of the most honorable things a believer can do. Because trust, once broken, doesn't heal with words. It heals with time and with effort. Every time we fulfill a promise, even when it's hard, we are strengthening our soul. We are aligning our character with the Sunnah. We are showing Allah that our word matters. And in a world full of empty promises, being someone who follows through is a quiet act of worship, one that doesn't require fanfare, only sincerity. So the next time your tongue begins to say, I promise, pause. Ask your heart if it means it. Ask your soul if it's ready to bear that responsibility. Because in the book of Allah, truthfulness is not just about avoiding lies. It's about honoring your word, even when no one's watching. And sometimes the smallest broken promise can echo louder than the biggest lie. Sin number 10, showing off good deeds, Riya. Subtlety. There is a delicate thread between sincerity and performance, between worship done for the sake of Allah and worship shaped by the gaze of others. On the surface, a good deed may look beautiful, a prayer offered with presence, a donation given generously, a word of dhikr spoken aloud. But beneath that surface, unseen by anyone but the soul and its creator, lies the question that reveals everything. Who was this truly for? And it is in this question that the sin of Riya, showing off, begins to unfold, often quietly, subtly, in ways that even the believer fails to recognize. The frightening thing about Riya is not how obvious it is, but how hidden. It rarely announces itself with pride. It slips in gently, like a whisper in the heart. A person gives in charity and feels a small thrill when others notice. A Quranic recitation is shared online, and the likes bring a sense of spiritual validation. A good deed is performed, but only after others arrive. The body moves in worship, but the heart, instead of facing the Qibla, is leaning toward admiration, approval, recognition. These are not crimes in the worldly sense. They leave no trace. But in the realm of the unseen, they threaten the purity of one's connection with Allah. The Prophet Muhammad feared this deeply for his ummah. He once warned his companions of a subtle form of shirk, not the worship of idols or the rejection of God, but the hidden act of doing righteous deeds for the sake of being seen. He described it as the hidden shirk, likening it to the stealth of a black ant crawling on a black stone in the middle of the night. That is how quiet, how undetectable it can be, and yet its consequences can be devastating. What makes Riya so dangerous is that it transforms the very essence of worship. What was meant to be a private moment between a servant and his Lord becomes a performance. The heart, instead of yearning for Allah's acceptance, begins to crave human applause. And the reward, once guaranteed by sincerity, is lost. Because Allah does not accept partners, even subtle ones. He does not share his right to be worshipped with the fleeting gaze of people who may praise you today and forget you tomorrow. Sometimes, the believer begins with the right intention. The heart is pure. The act is genuine. But midway through, the presence of others begins to shift the focus. A slightly longer sujood, a more elaborate reminder, a strategically timed post. And if the heart is not vigilant, this shift becomes a habit. A person starts to curate their good deeds for visibility. They speak more about what they've done than what they need to do. They fear being unseen more than being insincere. This is not to say that sharing good deeds is always wrong. Islam encourages encouraging others, inspiring goodness, reminding people of the rewards of righteous action. But the heart must be examined ruthlessly. It must be questioned. Is this being shared to benefit others or to elevate the self? Is this act public because it serves a greater good or because it feeds the ego? The difference may not be visible to anyone else, but Allah knows. And the soul knows too, if it is brave enough to listen. Riya often thrives in moments when we forget that Allah alone is enough. When we begin to seek validation from creation, we forget the sufficiency of the Creator. We forget that the most precious deeds are the ones done in silence, without announcement, without acknowledgement, sometimes even without full clarity. The charity given anonymously, the night prayer whispered in darkness, the forgiveness offered with no audience. These are the deeds that hold real weight, because they are done for a reward that no human can offer. And yet, we live in a time where every action can be displayed, measured, and affirmed instantly. We are told that if it's not seen, it didn't happen, that if it's not shared, it's not real. But in the divine accounting of the hereafter, it is the unseen that counts the most. The deeds done with trembling hearts, out of love, fear, longing. Those are the ones that shine on the day when nothing else will. There is a quiet dignity in serving Allah in solitude, a sacred intimacy in doing good without the need for recognition. It is in those moments, when the soul detaches from the need to be seen, that true worship begins. And when we feel the pull of Riya, the desire to impress, to be praised, to be admired, that is the moment to pause, to recenter, to whisper a prayer for sincerity, to remind ourselves that nothing we do for the sake of Allah is ever lost, even if no one else ever knows about it. Because on the day of judgment, the applause of the world will mean nothing. Likes and followers will hold no weight. What will matter is whether the heart did it for Him, and Him alone. And the ones who worshipped in silence will be the ones raised in glory. There are moments in life when the soul stirs, not from pain or excitement, but from truth. A truth that doesn't shout, doesn't overwhelm, but sits quietly within, urging us to look inward with honesty. Perhaps now, after hearing these lesser-known sins, you feel that stirring. Not the panic of guilt, but the awakening of awareness, the sense that somewhere along the way, we may have overlooked the weight of our actions. that in trying to avoid the major wrongs, we've allowed smaller cracks to form in our hearts, never realizing how they grew with time. But that realization, however uncomfortable, is a gift, because Allah does not expose our faults to shame us. He allows us to see them so we can begin to heal. He invites us into a space where reflection becomes worship, where even the act of noticing our mistakes becomes a step closer to Him. In His mercy, every moment of regret can be turned into a moment of redemption. And what greater mercy is there than a Lord who not only forgives but rewards the one who returns sincerely? The sins we've explored may not always be visible. They often hide in behavior that seems normal, in habits that feel harmless, in actions dismissed as insignificant. But the believer is called to a deeper awareness, to a higher standard, not because we are expected to be perfect, but because we are honored with the ability to change, to notice, to return. What separates the heedless from the awakened is not sin itself, it is the response to it. There are people who sin boldly and never look back. And then there are those who slip quietly, yet feel the weight of even the smallest wrong. Those are the hearts that are still alive, still tender, still receptive to the pull of Allah's mercy. And if you find yourself among them, the ones who feel discomfort, the ones who now see what they didn't before, then take comfort in knowing that your heart is still soft enough to be moved, and that is no small thing. Awakening doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing not to delay your prayer today, as looking away when your gaze lingers where it shouldn't, as answering your parent with gentleness instead of haste, as catching a joke before it cuts, as silencing your tongue before it slips. These choices may seem small, but they are signs that the heart is listening again, that the soul has begun to feel its way back to the light. And when you begin that return, Allah meets you with open arms. He doesn't remind you of your past, He welcomes your present. He writes your repentance among the most beloved of deeds. He places your name among those who are sincere, and He strengthens your steps toward purity, even when you stumble. The goal is never to be flawless. The goal is to never stop trying to be faithful. This journey is not about fear. It is about love, a love that compels you to care about the small moments, the subtle choices, the invisible intentions, because the one who truly loves their Creator pays attention, not just to how they worship, but to how they live, not just to what they show others, but to what they hide in their heart. So as you walk away from these words, don't carry shame. Carry awareness. Carry humility. Carry the quiet resolve to be better, not just in the big ways, but in the smallest corners of your daily life. You've seen what many don't. You've remembered what many forget. And that alone is a mercy. Let this be the beginning of a heart that sees clearly. A heart that fears sin not because of punishment, but because it longs to please the one who never stops watching, never stops forgiving, never stops loving. May your heart stay awakened, and may your steps always lead you back to Him.